last night at the Academy, some of the Masons were complaining that we were bringing the subject of Kabbalah into the explanation of Freemasonry, and that Kabbalah had nothing to do with Freemasonry. My response to that was, does Albert Pike have anything to do with Freemasonry? And of course he does, but not just Albert Pike. There's more to the connection between Kabbalah and Freemasonry than Albert Pike, don't you think?
Yes. I have to say that in some respects, I would agree that Kabbalah is not a source of Freemasonry, certainly. But if you think about the Hermetic Kabbalistic tradition as being the philosophical essence of the Renaissance, and then Freemasonry starting in the late 1600s in Britain, it wouldn't surprise me if the intellectual community in Britain, which formulated Freemasonry, had the tree of life and the metaphysical principles of Kabbalah not as a Judaic religion, but as a straightforward metaphysical approach to talking about metaphysical subjects. That, seems to me, is why there is a remarkable relationship between Kabbalah and Freemasonry. As I pointed out in the presentations, the Masonic symbolism fits properly on the tree of life so very, very well.
Well, the conference was mostly about the subject of initiation, and the principle involved in Kabbalism is the mystical ascent. So I guess the question was, how are we to understand this mystic ascent of the soul to its source with what it is that Masons do in their rituals and in their lectures?
Well, when I put Freemasonry symbols on the tree, I put the officers of the lodge up the central column. And the mystical ascent is a rise up the central column. Now, strictly speaking, that would say that the progression of an individual up the line through the offices of the lodge to the master's chair in the east would represent a mystical ascent. We don't think of it that way, but we could understand it in that sense if we understand the officers as positions up the tree. But it wouldn't surprise me if the tradition we have of a progressive line started that way as a model of the mystical ascent.
The whole theme of the conference was initiation, and that model on the Kabbalistic tree ought maybe then to be just as useful in understanding the journey of the entered apprentice as it would be the movement of the officers from position to position in the line. There's the illustration also of, in the second degree, of the staircase, which certainly suggests an ascent.
And there are two ways we can think about this. The first is if we think about the lower face of the tree as the ground floor, the triad of the soul as the middle chamber, and the upper face of the tree, the upper triangle, as the porchway entrance to the Holy of Holies, then that's where the 3 degrees take place, and the 3 degrees represent, in that case, an ascent up the tree. What was the second aspect of the... Oh, the second degree has a winding staircase. The winding staircase, well, the central part of the tree, the central column of the tree, is a ladder or staircase we sort of climb, and it's between the two opposite columns on the side of the tree. And the winding staircase is between the two columns at the door of the temple. So, and those two columns are opposites as the columns on the side of the tree are. So there's a lot of parallel between those images.
For the sake of those that might be viewing this and hearing this talk who aren't acquainted with the diagram of the Tree of Life or of the three columns, why would there have to be three columns with a central column providing the way of ascent? Why not there should just be one column that a person would climb up, as it were, in Jacob's ladder?
The model for the Tree of Life envisions three columns. This is an oversimplification, but generally speaking, the column on the right of the tree is the active column. It contains all the active creative forces in the tree, thing the tree represents. The column on the left is a restraining column and contains all the restraining disciplinary forces in this same agency. The central column is the column of consciousness, which holds the other two columns in balance at all their levels.
Now, in the Renaissance, which you mentioned, where Kabbalism found its way into what was maybe to become Freemasonry, we hear that there was a connection between the mysteries of architecture itself and some of these Kabbalistic designs that intrigued the minds of the Florentine and the British Kabbalists. How did architecture itself connect to all of this?
I don't have a real profound understanding of how architecture itself relates to Kabbalah.
Well, what I had in mind were the parts in your book where the nave of the Renaissance cathedral or the medieval cathedral represented one particular stage of initiation, followed by the screen and the choir as we move toward what we call the symbolic East. And I recall reading in the book that this had a connection also with that process of the spiritual ascent.
Well, it seems to me that if you look at the classical order of the church, the cathedral, the nave represents ordinary consciousness. The choir represents the psyche or the soul. The sanctuary represents the spirit. And if the sacrament is reserved in the sanctuary, the tabernacle represents divinity. Now that, I think, is an architectural representation of the four levels of consciousness. And you can find those four levels on the tree very easily. The divine triad, the spiritual triad, the soul.
Does a person need to know Hebrew or the Hebrew alphabet or its signification in order to make these connections between Kabbalah and Freemasonry?
No, I don't know Hebrew, and I don't know the Hebrew alphabet. They don't need to have that knowledge.